Hi, my name is Don Knezick, and I am the owner of Foggy Bottom Tree Farm. We operate on this property here in Columbus, New Jersey. My background is as a nurseryman, and we've had a very large native plant nursery for over 35 years. And back in 2020, I retired from that business, gave it to my wife and my two sons. And at the same time, I was offered a license from Rutgers University to grow their patented hazelnuts. Working with Dr. Molnar at Rutgers, he knew that I had extensive experience growing lots and lots of plants. So he thought it would be a good match for me to take the tissue culture cultivars that were being propagated by others and growing them on here in New Jersey and distributing to customers throughout the eastern United States as well as Canada. As you can see on the slide, just about all of my plants are grown in what is known as an elipot, which is a paper tube that is filled with the soil media of my choice. And they're grown in what's known as an air tray, which promotes a very aggressive root system. Elipot, Ellepot, elipot. And they are, I guess it was, I believe, a European invention or use, and is now being sold in the United States by a company called Blackmore. They're out of Michigan. And so they use that technology. And along with the Elipot, the important thing is that air tray, which you don't quite see well in the background, but it is a kind of a square tray. So you're putting a round Elipot into a square tray. So there's a lot of room for air pruning. And so when like in a regular pot, the roots hit the side and they kind of circle around. Here, they hit the side and they just go down. And it conserves enough moisture that the roots are they're not burning, inside that air tray, but it works very well. Now, not all of my plants look as good as that. Like some of them, like if you were to look right now, if I had to pull plants out, they'd have those brown roots. But in the springtime, when they're really starting to put on a lot of growth, that's what they look like. So that's the big advantage of this air tray. It puts on and the Elipot puts on such a really aggressive root system. So in order to better serve my customers, I decided to set up my own orchard. And that way I can see what my customers are going through. And I had a very common complaint about a lot of dieback in the spring. And at first, I thought this was winter injury. But then, upon closer examination, I realized that these plants were breaking bud and doing great, but then they were dying back. So when I started looking at some of the historical data, it turns out that we've been having some very, very warm late winter and early spring temperatures here in New Jersey and surrounding states as well. We've had temperatures up in the 70s in early March, and the plants just start to grow. So we've got plants that are breaking bud way before they should, and they're being exposed to sub-freezing temperatures. So this is what I'm experiencing. I'm seeing that these new tender growth that's coming out in April and early May are being damaged by late frosts. In most cases, the plants will resprout from the base, but that doesn't always happen. Rutgers recommends fall planting of their hazelnuts. Just about all the cultivars, even the seedlings that we're growing, they experience some dieback. But it turned out that Hunterton and Raritan, two of the Rutgers cultivars, those were the ones that seemed to be hit the hardest. Rutgers wants fall planting because they like to get as much root growth as possible. And a lot of their orchards are not irrigated. Any plants that were established for more than a year, and if they did experience some dieback, they recovered very, very quickly. So when you're fall planting, you really want to have the roots have a lot of chance to get established. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to mulch the plants very heavily so that I could increase the growing season in the fall and hopefully keep the roots from freezing in the middle of the winter. So I started out using salt hay, which was a byproduct of my native plant operation. So what I decided to do was I wanted to mulch the plants as heavily as I possibly could. The salt hay was very labor intensive, just pitchforking out around all the plants. So I ended up buying a side row mulcher, And this is a great machine that has made my life much, much easier. We can use any kind of mulch that we want in this, but in my situation, I've been using wood chips. And we just load this up with wood chips, and there are all different sizes of side row mulchers. This one has a capacity of about 8 yards. So when the mulcher is filled to the brim, I will ride it down the rows, and I can shoot mulch out on either side that I want and put a nice band of mulch around the plants. And in most cases, I go back around and I do the other side, and then I will rake it out. So the side row mulcher is almost 25 grand, but it was definitely saved my back a lot. So this past year, I went through hundreds of yards of wood chips, and it has turned out to be very, very advantageous for me. The only thing is took a lot of time to put down hundreds and hundreds of yards of wood chips, 8 cubic yards at a time, but it was well worth the time and effort. So now I have 3 to 4 inches of wood chips around all the plants in a row all the way down, and it keeps the soil from freezing in the winter. But also, we've had some severe droughts here in the eastern United States, and even in the middle of the drought, when everything is bone dry and the ground is cracked and very, very arid, underneath the wood chips, it's still moist. So that has really helped a lot. One of the ways that I try to handle some of the late spring frost is by making sure that the plants are very well rooted in the fall. So I try to plant as early in the fall as possible and put on the layer of wood chips. But if that is not possible, then we want to go with a dormant planting. But there's some problems with that as well. With my other operation, we have many hoop houses where we overwinter hundreds of thousands of plants. So I decided to transfer some of my plants into these hoop houses with the thought that I was going to be able to distribute them in March and April. Unfortunately, it was so warm here in New Jersey that the plants, even in these unheated white poly houses, the plants broke bud very, very early. Unfortunately, I couldn't distribute them because they had already started to grow. So instead of planting very, very early, the next strategy is to let the plants grow in the greenhouses. And when the threat of frost passes in the area where they're to be planted, here in New Jersey, it's very early May, that's when I will ship out the plants. Using this technique, I've had zero mortality or near zero mortality on plants that I put in my own orchard. The only problem with planting in the springtime, especially in May, is that you may have to provide supplemental irrigation. So here are just a few common sense recommendations. I try to plant as early in the fall as possible. And in fact, I will even plant in the middle of the summer if need be, and water the plants in very thoroughly. And for the fall, I apply a very thick layer of mulch to preserve moisture and extend the growing season. And if I need to, I plant in the spring when the plants that are actively growing after the threat of frost has passed. That's it. Salt hay is a grass that grows in the intertidal zone along the coast of all up and down the eastern United States into the Gulf of Mexico. So with my nursery, we would grow a couple salt marsh plants, one of which is Spartina alterniflora, which is smooth cordgrass, and that actually grows right in the intertidal zone. So it's flooded twice a day with salt water. And we also grow another plant called salt meadow cordgrass, which is Spartina patens, and that grows just above the high tide mark, but it does get flooded on high tides. So both of these plants have to be very salt tolerant. To harvest the seed, we grow, I don't want to say a million, but many hundreds of thousands of each of these individual plants. So we will go out in the marsh with boats. We'll go out with boats, guys in hip waders and chest waders, I should say, and with scythes in little hand size, they grab like a handful of the tops, and with a scythe they cut it off and they put it in bags, and we will have hundreds and hundreds of the bags of this tops. We bring it back to the nursery and we dry it out and we flip it, and eventually the seed will fall off. So we have the seed, which much of it is stored in salt water to keep it from germinating until we want it to germinate. But we end up with all this extra biomass and figure, okay, well, let me use it for mulch. And I've done that for many years, but turns out that me as an older guy with a pitchfork, just pitchforking over hundreds and hundreds of plants was very, very time consuming. Well, I wanted to do all the Rutgers cultivars because, like I said, I wanted to experience what my growers would experience, and that these Rutgers, Dr. Molnar is a wonderful guy, and I love working with him. And they recommend their cultivars for zones for 6 and 7. It's kind of warm, and I have growers who are in Michigan, along the Great Lakes and along in Ohio and upstate New York. And Dr. Molnar also says, well, you can grow in the fruit growing regions of the Northeast. Well, okay. So that might be zone 5 or edges zone 5. I've got growers in north central Vermont who are growing the Rutgers cultivars, and they're thriving. The question then is, will they produce nuts? Because the female flower is apparently very hardy to very, very cold temperatures, but the pollen, once it starts to expand, it can be damaged. I was talking to Jeff from Z's Nutty Ridge, and he is, oh my gosh, is he in a cold, cold area, very, very exposed. And he was saying that, certain years, just the pollen is just not viable at all. So you don't get good nut set at all. It turned out, my one son when I was originally looking at the Rutgers hazelnuts, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I'll set up my own orchard. And my one son said, no, you don't want to do that. You're not gonna make any money. And out in Oregon, the guys, the growers are getting like $1 a pound or $1.50 a pound. And if they have a good year in Turkey, they're not going to get any money. So I figured, well, I'll start out slow, but I wanted to see what my growers go through. So I put in about maybe a half an acre orchard. So I used all the Rutgers cultivars. And back then, Rutgers was recommending seedling pollinizers, because one of the drawbacks of the program, and I don't know how this came about, but it turns out that of the 4 cultivars, only Monmouth would cross-pollinate with Somerset and Raritan. Hunterdon didn't cross-pollinate with anything. And so I think they had some problems that orchards were not being very productive because they didn't have enough compatible pollen. So one way around that was to, grow a lot of seedlings, from nuts collected from resistant trees in their Rutgers orchards, and plant them out. And hopefully you will get, the right pollen, they'll be flying. So we've done that, but now a couple things that we kind of knew that there could be Eastern filbert blight in those seedlings. And I don't have it yet, but a friend of mine, a grower, has been in for a year or so longer than me. He's starting to see Eastern filbert blight in some of his seedlings. So he's cutting them out. But now the new cultivars that Rutgers is working on, they were selected for nut quality, disease resistance, but also because they will cross-pollinate with everything else. So pollination was a little bit higher up on the priority list. And by the way, the beast became very, very important for the Rutgers project, because the beast will cross-pollinate with Hunterdon, with Raritan, with Monmouth and Somerset. So I have beasts all throughout my orchard. And but in the future, there'll probably be cultivars like New Brunswick and Hudson and Atlantic and Burlington and Cumberland, the new ones that will cross-pollinate better and also produce higher quality nuts than even the beast will. I would call it more a spring dieback.
Yeah.
It's probably a combination that the roots haven't grown in very, well enough that some of the plants are a little bit more susceptible, but they're breaking bud. I mean, they're big. The leaves are coming out. They're big and robust, and all of a sudden you get a frost and they get zapped. And this is kind of interesting that we're talking about things breaking bud early. The plants, most of my operation, they're in clear poly greenhouses that I put a shade cloth over the top. And in the winter, they everything goes dormant. Um, and I have, side automatic side vents and a roof vent, so I can try to keep it cool. And some of these things are breaking bud. I don't understand. It's like 30 degrees at night. I have my thermostat set for like 34, 35 degrees for my heaters to come on. It gets down to maybe sometimes 29 or 30 degrees. So it's definitely cold in there at night, but during the daytime it's 55 or 60. So I started to see some leaves popping out. Here's January. Ugh.
Crazy.
Pests, no, nothing, no really pest problems. Deer can be a problem. People have warned me, so with all this mulch, you're going to have problems with mice and voles and moles and things like that. I have not. Um, so that has worked well. And uh, NRCS has all kinds of fencing initiatives out there. I have not put up fencing around my orchards. We've got the one farm that we're working on is 125 acres, so it's a lot of fencing to put up. But what I've been able to do is I've used uh, Irish Spring soap and dryer sheets. They work. It's not 100% effective, but I will put them all throughout my orchard. And just recently, I don't have a picture in this presentation, but I've been playing around with a mesh tree tubes. Rutgers is not a fan of tree tubes. I've been in the restoration industry, and the NRCS, they love tree tubes. You put these plants out in the field, and then the deer come and munch them back. So they want like 4 or 5 foot tall tree tubes. Rutgers is not a big fan of that. Okay, we could argue one way or the other. But I came across with mesh tree tubes, which are, I don't know who makes them, but I know where I buy them. And it's just like a black mesh, and it's very, very lightweight. You don't even have to stake them in. You just put them around the tree. Actually, you have to have little buttons. You kind of secure them, yes, around. And that is going to be my deer protection. It's not going to do anything for moles and voles. But the nice thing about it is that with hazelnuts, if you want to have an orchard that you're going to harvest mechanically, you want to have these more in tree form. You don't want them in shrub form. So there's a lot of pruning that goes on with hazelnuts. So, we have them. I've definitely had them. They're pruned up to be true form. As soon as they get at least 4.5 feet tall, I start pruning them up, and I put these mesh tree tubes on them. And I've been going with the herbicide AIM, which an Oregon state recommends. And that's worked very well for me, although I have to apply it fairly frequently. But with the mesh tree tubes, I can spray through the mesh, and I can get all the sprouts coming from the base, as well as even some coming up on the stem, where if I had a solid tree tube, I couldn't do that. We're actually in, people think of New Jersey as a very industrialized state,
Yep.
and parts of it are, but where we are, we're in the farm belt of New Jersey. It's pretty flat. I wouldn't mind a little bit more topography, but it's very, very flat. And corn and soybeans are the thing, and straw and alfalfa hay, and that's what's done, all year round. And in fact, for a while, my particular county led the nation in the number of acres of preserved farmland. New Jersey has a very active farmland preservation program where landowners can sell their development rights to the state and the county, and in turn, they promise that they're going to maintain the land and agriculture. And for a while, I think we were number one in the country. Now I think we're down about number 4 or something like that. But I think New Jersey has realized that we're so industrialized and there's so much building pressure in the state that they had to do something. And so they spent many, many millions of dollars to preserve lots and lots of farms. And I'm a lucky recipient that I get to live and work on these farms. I guess the problem here in New Jersey is that, with all these big home builders and Walmarts and Wawas and different industrial uses, land is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So when we bought this, this was a preserve farm. The land was worth about $8,000 an acre.
Yeah.
Um, as far as a for residential use, it might have been worth $100,000 an acre. So the
Exactly.
state has to come up with a difference between what the real value is and what the agricultural value is, and that's what the farmer ends up getting. If I were, here I'm so concerned about getting really good fall root growth to minimize any of the spring dieback. Hey, if I put in a bigger pot, I probably, that would work. That would work as well. And so this side, these are 10 cell elepots. So each of the cells is 3 inch by about 6 inches. And I could grow them. They're like 6 cell elepots, and there's 1 cell elepots. They could be, 8 inches across and very, very deep. But as far as selling lots and lots of plants, this is a pretty convenient tray that they're 10 in a tray. I can pick up 20 at a time and put in my pickup truck if I want. I can probably put about 260 plants, 26 trays in my pickup truck really easily. And it's a convenient way to move the plants around. Yeah, it might be better if I had larger ones, but they would cost more money and take up a lot more room in the greenhouses, and transportation would be much more difficult. Some people have taken the elepots and they put them in like a 1 or 2 gallon container. As a matter of fact, that's what I've come to. I will take, when I have surplus plants, and I do on occasion, I'll put them into a number 3 container. And then I will either try to sell them as a number 3, or if I have holes in my orchard where I mentioned in the middle of the summer, I have some plants that die back that have died, I will just take a 3 and I have no problem with those whatsoever. So, and I will plant in the hottest day in August, as long as I go out there and I water. I just, mark every plant and I just go out there and water it maybe once a week, and then they're fine. The first outfit that we were dealing with was a company called Night Hollow, and they were, I guess, they were paid by Rutgers to develop the propagation techniques for the hazelnuts, which can be very, very difficult to learn the techniques for. So Rutgers had started to work with North American plants out in Oregon, and uh, they actually gave the North American plants some of their cultivars to work on, and they developed the techniques for a few of them right off the bat. And when I started buying plants from North American plants, they came in a 50 cell flat. Some of them were, 3 inches tall, some of them were 6 inches tall, very well rooted, and they were grown in an elipot. They grew them in 50 cell elipots, little round elipots. And it was very simple for me and what I do is you just take a drill. I take a hand drill with, I could buy from Blackmore, I could have bought, probably a $40,000 machine to actually drill them. And we have machines like that here in the nursery. But I figure I just take a hand drill and zip, 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 zip. Now we have employees that do that for me and just transfer the plants. We can do, thousands and thousands of plants in a day very easily. So the Elipot system has worked out very nicely for me. The only now a problem that I'm coming into now is that Rutgers has 5 or 6 new cultivars, all Jersey names, and they are not in tissue culture yet, and who knows if they'll ever be in tissue culture. So Dr. Molnar is recommending, well, they do a lot of grafting, which I've done some, and it's okay. But I'll backtrack. A lot of the plants that I have to replant in the middle of the summer are grafts that I did that didn't make it because of the drought or from other reason. And I just have a good rootstock, which happens to be the beast, if you know what the beast is. So I have, great, good understock, but, I want to have a nice row of single cultivar. So I pop out and I put in a number 3 in there, and they do just fine. So I'm kind of turned off the grafting a little bit because my success hasn't been all that wonderful. Um, and Dr. Molnar is now recommending layering. So we're doing layering. So I've done some of my own layering and it's worked out well. And he's recommending we set up layering beds for these new cultivars. I can get the old ones through tissue culture, which is great. But so the new ones, if I do a layer and I have, a 2 foot tall plant with a big robust root system, I'm not going to put it into an elipot anymore. So I'm going to have to put it into a larger pot. So it's going to change my system a little bit, but we'll see. We'll see where that goes.